Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the modeling lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers and the modeling industry. The modeling lifestyle is sponsored by NGMC, who believes that through bringing hobbyists together with both information and modeling, the hobby will grow stronger with more model builders than ever. NGMC, which started as narrow gauge modeling company, is focused in 1/4 inch scale across hobbies. NGMC is a market leader in 1/4 inch scale with a range of products from over 50 vendors. In 2021, NGMC became the largest reseller of out-of-production model paint in North America with over 9,000 bottles in stock. And now to Jim Kello, MMR, host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
Well, welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We think that we've got an excellent show for you and hope you enjoy it. Most importantly, we hope you learn something. Modeling Lifestyle, our shows, we not only introduce you to some really great, outstanding modelers, but the people that we try to introduce you to are also doing an awful lot of other things for our hobby. And they're making contributions in a multitude of ways that are really playing a significant part for our hobby and also a significant part in their lives. We really appreciate you joining us this evening. We hope that you'll freely use the chat function on YouTube. We'll try to get your question asked as soon as we realize you've asked it, and we'll try to get you a good answer from our guest. So please join us that way if you care to, or if you have a question. Tonight we have a fantastic guest, David Vaughn. David has truly had modeling become a major part of his lifestyle. He's not only a fantastic scale modeler, but he's also a major promoter of our hobby of model railroading, and particularly O-scale model railroading. He's inspired and he's helped many, many modelers and people around the world improve their knowledge of our hobby and be able to become better model railroaders. So welcome, David. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Really been looking forward to this.
Well, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to appear. And for those of you who've never looked behind the curtain at a presentation like this, I want to tell you, it takes a lot of work, a lot of preparation from the producers and from Jim to make it look smooth and easy. And in preparation for this show, I had an opportunity to learn about that, and it was really great working with Phil and with Dylan and with you. So I look forward to it.
Well, thank you so much. Well, listen, let's get started here. And really the whole focus of this is we're just a bunch of people sitting around, maybe having a cup of coffee, trying to make sure that everybody understands who David Vaughn is and the contributions that he is making and has made to our wonderful hobby. So David, let's start by telling us a little bit about your background, sir.
Well, thank you. I grew up in Michigan, actually Ann Arbor, Michigan, go blue. I trained as a lawyer after my military service. I spent most of my career working as an arbitrator and mediator in labor and employment disputes. I did a fair amount of work in the railroad industry. I'm still working. Somebody's got to pay everybody's Social Security contributions, and I guess I'm the guy. I moved from the Midwest to Washington, D.C. in 1975. I've been there ever since. I live in Clarksville, Maryland, with my wife, Katty, a large layout, and a spoiled cat.
Well, let me ask you this. What drew you to model railroading? There's a lot of hobbies out there that you could have participated in. Why model railroading?
I'm not sure I can put my finger on any one thing. I've loved trains since I was a small child. I had a long wooden pull toy train when I was about 5. That may be the root of my desire to run long trains now. I'm not sure. I got a Marx train for Christmas when I was about 6, and I can give everybody on the call a tip. You cannot play with your Marx electric train in the sandbox and then expect it to run when you bring it back inside. But we had in terms of translating a general interest in trains into an interest in model railroading, we had a neighborhood hobby shop in Ann Arbor. Remember neighborhood hobby shops? Named Ryder. And I was about, I guess, probably 11 or so. And Ken Ryder would sit at the counter on a Saturday morning and build models and tell railroad stories to the kids. I listened, I got hooked. My first scale model railroad purchase was an undecorated Athearn Blue Box F7A unpowered. I paid $1.29 for it. And I thought I was in high cotton when I did that. There was an Ann Arbor Model Railroad Club, which I joined at the age of about 14. One of the fellows I met there was a guy named Tom Bailey. We're still friends after 65 years, but it was a good group to start with, and got me interested in working with people as well as working with trains. But I think probably the thing that really got me hooked in terms of being a serious model railroader was reading John Armstrong's Track Planning for Realistic Operation. I realized the potential, and I really wanted to be a part of it. And I attribute John Armstrong's book, which had just come out when I was finishing high school, the first edition. I had a study hall right before my physics class, and I discovered that if you did it right, you could fit John Armstrong's book inside the notebook, so it would look like you were studying for your class. And I didn't do all that well in physics, and I certainly blew my shot to have a career there. But I think I more than made up for it with the results of the John Armstrong book.
Listen, there's all different kind of facets to model railroading. And all of us, I guess, have our favorite aspect of it or favorite part that really intrigues us and interests us the most. How about you? What part of model railroading, really interests you?
I got to answer that on several different levels. First, I'm a freight car guy. I just love freight cars, and I love watching long trains run. I like to be able to pick out particular freight cars. I like to know about the history of them. One of the reasons I like O-scale so much is that you get a much better sense of the individual pieces of rolling stock as they're going by. But I guess probably more generally, I really enjoy working on projects, both developing them, thinking about them, working them through, and then I like to enjoy the projects when they're successful. And one of my real joys in life is keeping alive the heritage, ideas, and the person of John Armstrong. We'll talk about that more as we go through this. But I am trying to keep alive his contributions to the hobby. That's a picture of John and his engine terminal, and that very scene is now a part of the layout that I have. But I guess if there's one little special tidbit that sticks out, it would be trying to preserve John Armstrong's heritage.
That's fantastic, and I know a lot of us really appreciate the effort that you're going in for that. Well, listen, before we go any further, let's bring in a couple of your friends to join the conversation so we get a better, fuller picture about who you really are. First, let me introduce Jim Cantor. Jim, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. We really appreciate your efforts.
Thank you for having me. It's great to participate along with David. I've watched him really promote the hobby over the years, and promote the Nickel Plate Road and the Historical and Technical Society. So it's been a real treat to watch the people that he's introduced into the hobby and be part of that. Thank you.
Listen, let me ask you a question. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up first meeting David? Do you remember?
Well, several years ago, I went to some O-scale shows, and I actually brought out some nickel plate hoppers that were done by the Intermountain, okay? And they did 100 of them for me. And let's just say the first 80 sold really pretty quick. And the last 20 just kind of drug on. So David bought the last 20 from me. And then after he bought them, then he proceeded to tell me how you're able to change the numbers on a plastic car. But he didn't disclose that before, only after he purchased them. So he's got a nice set of cars that Intermountain did, and they were nickel plate. And from then, we just developed a strong relationship and shared the same interest in O-scale. And fortunately for myself, I'm originally from Muncie, Indiana, which was the home of the Overland models. So it was around Tom Marsh and Brian Marsh. And then David and I from there developed an interest in brass trains. Then we actually imported some brass cars and worked through Overland to do that. So that was a real treat. But one thing you learned about David is that he's very much into the detail, getting things correct, getting it right, and whether it's plastic, resin, or brass. But for myself, grew up around the nickel plate, but being part of Muncie, Indiana, and knowing people like Mont Switzer, Tom Marsh made a real impact on me and kept my interest strong in the hobby.
And Jim Cantor is a dyed-in-the-wool Proto 48 modeler, but he is being modest. He's also a home builder, and the engine terminal that you see back there is the engine terminal on his railroad. And he did something that all of the rest of us envy. He basically designed a layout and then designed a house that would fit over the top of it. So that layout is really beautiful. He uses number 16 turnouts and has this beautiful, long, flowing, and prototypically properly gauged layout. But I got two things going. One is I have more nickel plate Berkshires than he does, although he's always trying to catch up with me. And the second is we tend to egg on each other. So I'll give you an example. We get each other into projects. So Jim called me up and he said, you know what? I wonder what would have happened if the nickel plate hadn't gotten taken over by the N&W and had continued in existence. Would it have had SD42s? And I said, yes, I guess it would. Well, we ought to find a way to get SD42s in nickel plate paint. So we call Sunset Third Rail, and their first idea is, no, we don't do custom runs like that. Well, they're like any other business. If you pay them enough money and you buy enough of their product, they'll do some for you. So be watching for nickel plate SD40-2s coming from Sunset Third Rail. And that was basically a Jim Cantor idea, and he lassoed me into it. So we sort of lasso each other into these different projects.
Well, what I've heard about Jim Cantor is if you stand too close to him, you become a P48 modeler, and you don't realize you become one.
I've had 2 vaccines and a booster now to stop me from converting over to Proto 48, and I still occasionally get drawn in that direction.
So is this new modeler going to be P48?
Well, modeling in general, as long as it has a flange on it, we all enjoy it. The one thing that's been special about David is that whether it's S scale, HO, or N scale, or in David's case, even some Z scale, as long as it's got a flange on it, he enjoys it. I told him personally, if it's a barn door and it's got a flange on it, I like that also. So if it's got a flange, we like it. And if it's got nickel plate on it, that's just a bonus.
I got you. I got you. Well, listen, let me take a break here and introduce another friend, Eric Payne. Eric, thanks so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you dropping by.
No problem. Thanks, Jim. How are you doing tonight? Doing
well. Listen, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to know David.
Well, just like Jim, I've known Dave a while, not as long as Jim, of course, but Dave has pulled me in to lots of different adventures, from the Nickel Plate Railroad Historical Society to Proto 48 modeling, to operating over at his place, to putting ballast down on tracks. Whatever it is, it's always a good time to go over and run trains at Dave's house. His layout has 5 or 6 different levels, and you can definitely spin the drivers on the Berkshires there for sure. It's always a good time going over there.
Well, I sure do appreciate both of you joining us. And please, while I may ask David the question, if you have a comment that makes sense and you want to include it in whatever David and I are talking about, please join in. This is not just, sit and watch. This is the four of us sitting around trying to have a conversation.
Let me plug a little bit of Eric's background that he didn't mention. We met through the Nickel Plate Society because Eric's father George is, on top of many other interests, a nickel plate fan, and George and Eric and I all served on the board of directors of the Nickel Plate Historical and Technical Society. Sometimes it gets difficult to distinguish the two Paynes, and unfortunately, perhaps for Eric, he is known affectionately by everybody as the lesser Payne. So, in any event,
a smaller Payne, a little Payne, if you will.
Yes, a little Payne, and. Eric and his father both have encouraged me along the road of 12-inch to the foot modeling. Eric and his dad are part owners of, I think it's 7 or 8 different 12-inch to the foot passenger cars, including Catalpa Falls, which is a former Pennsylvania Railroad 6-bedroom buffet lounge. Which is in Amtrak, which is certified to run in Amtrak, and which they use regularly for charter service. And they were one of the inspirations that led me down the same 12-inch to the foot path. Maybe we can talk about that a little more later. But Eric is a very astute guy and a qualified car manager, 12-inch to the foot.
Yep.
I'm almost scared to be around these two guys. It seems like they've exerted an awful lot of influence on you, so I'm kind of worried about what could rub off.
Yeah, get your vaccination and boosters early. That's all I can tell you.
Well, listen, let's change the subject here a little bit. Let's talk about John Armstrong. I know you're a really strong follower of his. I know that you have saved some of his layout and incorporated it in yours. And I know that you've done the same thing for 2 other modelers that we wish were still here and could be with us tonight, Ted Stepik and Ed Rapay. And I understand you have some of their railroad in your railroad. So I really admire what you're doing to try to save the modeling of some of the I'll call them heroes of the past. How did you get involved with doing that?
Well, I told you about my unfortunate brush from a physics point of view with John Armstrong's book. When I moved to Washington in 1975, John was the titular head, I suppose, of a round robin O-scale group that existed. Ted Stepik, who you just mentioned, was one of the other members, and Ed Rapay was yet another. There were several more, and I was invited over to John Armstrong's house. When I was reading his book as a high school student, I never would have dreamed to be able to meet him and run trains on his layout. But I was able to do that, and seeing, I was in HO scale at the time. I was modeling New York Central. I had a large collection of HO scale New York Central brass locomotives, which were sitting in boxes in my closet because I didn't have a layout to run them in. But once I saw O scale and had a chance to run the trains and look at it up close and personal, I converted to O scale, and I continued to participate in the round robin group. And there came a time, as it will for all of us eventually, when a number of the members of that group became ill, died, retired, moved away, and some of the layouts became available. The first one was Ted Stepix, which was a Penzi layout that John Armstrong had designed and which was featured in one of John's books. And the layout was just beautifully constructed. All of the track was hand laid. The curves were easemented and super elevated. It was just a very high quality layout. And what happens to most layouts like that is they wind up going out in the dumpster, because after the modeler passes away, the house is going to be sold. The family needs the space for other purposes, whatever. And nobody really knows what to do with it. But I really thought it was important to preserve the layout. So I made an arrangement with the estate to cut up the layout, remove it. And unfortunately, the layout was never designed to be moved. It was not modular the way we have layouts now. And it turned out to be very difficult, but it was worth it. And I took the layout and I reconstructed it in the front room of my basement. It required reconfiguration to be longer and narrower. And now what's showing here are sections of John Armstrong's layout, which is now that's the third layout that I acquired. But I looked at the layout that I built from Ted Stepix layout and decided that I really liked operating it. I liked O scale, and I also liked the idea of long trains and good opportunities for display. And I ended up making an addition on the house to fit additional layouts. There are other stories that go with that about the domestic implications of something like that, but that's a story for another time. So I dug out an additional 42 feet and basically doubled the size of the basement. Ed Rapé, who is a marvelous Penzi modeler and has been working on a new layout, 2,700 square feet, that's going to be published sometime in the next several years, is going to blow everybody's socks off. He had a layout that was not quite what he wanted. And when he retired and moved from the Washington area down to Williamsburg, Virginia, his layout became available. And this was in 2004. And I procured that and put parts of it together. And then unexpectedly, John Armstrong passed away, and the usual family dance went on. The first thing that happens when the family comes in after a modeler passes away is they come in from their busy schedules and they bring a real estate agent in. And the first thing the real estate agent does when she goes down to the basement is say, "You got to get the layout out of here." But the family wanted, and I think everybody in the Washington O-scale group wanted, preservation of the layout, or at least significant parts of it if it could. And the family particularly wanted, that's John Armstrong's son there on the left, and also named John, and his brother in the center, and me on the right. This was a little later at the 2018 National Convention. In any event, the family really wanted the layout preserved so people could see it and enjoy it. I had the space, and I shoehorned significant portions of the John Armstrong layout into my basement alongside the Stepic layout and the Rapé layout. And for those of you who'd like more detail on that, the layout was eventually featured in Great Model Railroads 2016, which is still available from Kalmbach in their past issues section. So you can learn more about how the layout came to be. But I was able to save substantial parts of the layout. I've incorporated the three of them into a single layout. It only fits by going multi-level. So there are places where there are 3 or 4 or 5 levels. That's basically a 2-track dog bone with staging loops at each end. The top staging loop is at 80 inches. You walk underneath it in the aisles, and the bottom, the lower staging loop is down about 32 inches. And then you've got about 35 or 40 minutes of running to get all the way around the layout. So it's fairly good size. And I've had a wonderful experience as a result of doing this, particularly preserving John's layout. So I've had something like 4,000 visitors since the layout opened, and I've had people come from all over the world. I'm not I'm under no illusions. They're coming to see John Armstrong's layout, not me, but I'm happy to share it with them.
I really admire what you're doing. I just wish we could find a way to salvage some of the other great model railroads when people have to abandon them. But it's just not possible to keep all of them, and that's just too bad. So I really admire what you're doing, David.
Thank you.
Your model company that you started, your model railroad company, in addition to everything else you do, called Wit and Wisdom. Now you've released, at least I know, one John Armstrong model of the diner that he had on his railroad. That it's a famous model.
Yes.
And I know you have plans for, I think it's a hopper car out next. But tell us a little bit about your company. Why did you start it? What are the models that you produce, and what are your plans? Where are you taking this company?
Well, it all started with my admiration for John Armstrong's modeling skills. And you may remember that the Nighthawks Cafe, which is what is pictured in the photo that you've got up on the screen, was actually taken from a very famous painting by a man named Edward Hopper. And John Armstrong was an art aficionado in addition to being a modeler, and he decided he wanted to build a model of that, and he had only a relatively small space on his layout. And when he started trying to model it, he discovered that Edward Hopper had played all kinds of games with angles and distances and light and so on. And he had to backwards engineer what the actual building would have looked like. And he did that and wrote a very interesting article about it in Model Railroader. I'm sorry, I don't have the citation to the year and issue that he's got, but if you look at one of the indexes, you'll find it. I had been fascinated with the painting, with the model, and with the way John explained it. And I had the article photocopied and tacked up over my workbench where it stood for about 30 years. I never got around to building it, but I was always interested. John Armstrong was an engineer. He was actually an ordnance engineer, and he worked for the Navy. And he had the kind of methodical approach to building and planning his projects that you would expect from an engineer. So part of working with the Armstrong family after John's death in 1994 was to have them offer me access to all of John's project notes and notebooks. And he was meticulous in the way that he had planned his projects. I actually have the drawings where he tried to figure out what Edward Hopper had been doing, playing all the games with light and angle and distance and so on. And I was able to actually use the source documents to plan this kit. I decided that I really thought, I had always wanted to share it. I had up close and personal contact with the original, but I really thought it ought to be shared with the hobby. And so I designed the kit, found a kit builder who was willing and able to do it, set up the company, and here that's a photograph of me at a Indianapolis multi-NMRA region where I'm plugging both wit and wisdom, and you can see the edge there, O-scale 2 rail. But the model is the one that we had commercially built, and I made it available in 4 scales: O scale, which is the scale it was originally built in, but also S scale, HO, and N, because I wanted to share Armstrong's vision and his model with modelers in other scales. And part of the reason for this, I mean, when I was a relatively young modeler, everybody in the hobby knew exactly who John Armstrong was, and they probably knew what his most recent articles or projects has been. But, time passes, and there are people in the hobby now who are not conversant with John. A lot of John's books have gone out of print because, publishers, they're looking for star power, and they want a new guy, and they want a new theme. And so it's necessary to go back and educate people about a guy that I never thought when I was started would ever need to be educated about, but we've done it.
But you ought to be very proud of it, because I've seen the model, and it is one absolutely beautiful model. So I wish you the best of luck, and hope that you come out with some other products in the future.
Well, we've got a couple more, and this slide right here is one of them. One of the other projects that John had was he Imagineered. I love that. I love that term. He took something that did not exist in the prototype, and he made a model of it, but he made a model using prototype practices. And this was an articulated 200-ton hopper, which John, who was a famous punster, nicknamed the Cementipede. And this is actually the original model, which I have. And we are looking right now for a builder. We're making some progress to go ahead and bring this to market as well, probably in assembled form. When I started out with this project several years ago, I thought we might do it in brass, but things are so crazy in the brass market right now. I think we're not going to do that. But the good news is that between 3D printing and resin tooling, the hobby has moved in some very nice ways in terms of being able to build really beautiful models and relatively quickly, relatively simply, relatively inexpensive.
You're going to bring that out in all 4 scales too, or just O scale?
Well, sometimes our companies become unintentionally nonprofit. I try and avoid doing that. And so the name of the game basically is to figure out whether there's a market. Obviously, John Armstrong was better known in O scale, and the models that he had are probably better known there. So we're going to start with O scale, and we're going to start mostly, if not all, with assembled models. Take it out of the box, put it on the track. Assembled, painted, lettered trucks, couplers, boom. There is, sad to say, a much more limited market for kits, particularly something like that that's a little out of the ordinary than there used to be. But that's our plan, and we're looking at some models that I said this might be unintentionally nonprofit. Most of the profits that we get from this are going to be plowed back into a website which will honor and educate about John Armstrong, and that's under development right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I look forward to seeing the kit come out, David.
Thank you.
Listen, with everything else you've got on your plate, I know finding time for modeling has to be difficult for you. But let's take a few minutes and concentrate on your modeling and see some of the photos and have you talk about them a little bit.
Okay, well, a lot of the work that I do, I still work full time, and I've got all these different side projects, and every time I turn around, Jim Cantor or somebody is suggesting that I get tangled up with something else. So a lot of the projects that I modeling that I do ends up being projects in one way or another. So I wanted a way to honor the fact that my layout is a joint nickel plate and Canandaigua Southern operation. I was trying to figure out how to do it. And in preparation for the 2018 O-Scale National Convention, we needed a second premium convention car. And I borrowed shamelessly from Pacific Fruit Express and their lettering model and imagineered a refrigerator company jointly owned by Nickel Plate and Canandaigua Southern with a minority owner from Midland Road, which is Tony Custer's pre-Nickel Plate layout that he did. And so I designed the lettering. We found a painter. We found a company that would do computer graphics on it. So each and all of the refrigerator cars had individual numbers, and we used it as the sort of reserve premium convention car for 2018 as a fundraiser. And
that is great.
So if you'll notice there, the one on the left is a wood car. The one on the right is a steel car. We actually, I think, had 3 different classes of those. I got quite into it at one point with different classes, and all of the repack and reweigh dates were separate and so on. So we had a lot of fun with that, and I was delighted. That's another one I was delighted to be able to share with people.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Now, Canandaigua, John Armstrong, I don't say he had a short attention span, but on any particular project, he would work it until he sort of got to where he wanted to be, and then he would stop. And if you tried to call a particular area or project unfinished, he would correct you, because he said, unfinished connotes that I may go back and finish it sometime. And he said, once I've figured out how to do it and gone as far as I want, I'm not interested anymore, so it's never going to get finished. One of the areas where he shorted himself was on Canandaigua Southern's freight car fleet. Now, we know from reading that if you go to any particular prototype railroad, you should expect that about half of the cars on the home railroad's rails are going to be from that railroad. So you would expect that there would be a lot of Canandaigua Southern rolling stock. In point of fact, there are only 3 or 4 pieces of rolling stock, maybe a few more, because he had some ore cars and he had some hoppers, but he had very few freight cars proportional to the size of the railroad. And so I wanted to have a more representative freight car roster, and I had to go and invent what would Canandaigua Southern, a relatively poor eastern road. Somebody said that it was a miracle that the Ontario and New York, Ontario, and Western survived as long as it did, because it went through the most populated part of the country without ever hitting any major city. And if you look, Canandaigua Southern sort of worked in that direction too. So Canandaigua Southern would have been a poor railroad in a grungy eastern environment. I found some dispatch shops, built covered hoppers that are now produced by, I always get the spelling wrong, Fernango and Camerlingo. Somebody can do it much better than me. Anyway, so I figured that out, that they would have used dispatch shops hoppers. And I had decals done for a lot of different Canandaigua Southern engines, freight cars. Now, this is interesting because this car has National Type B trucks, and it is one of only 2 runs of covered hoppers that were ever built with National Type B trucks. The other one was for Santa Fe. So I had fun figuring out, mixing and matching, and trying to set the details and so on of these different cars. I decided, for example, that the boxcar would have to be an X29, because half the railroads in the East either had a direct copy of the X29 or something that was 90% of the way there. So I had a lot of fun developing those. And in fact, in connection with the 2018 convention, we needed a convention car. And so we cut a deal with Atlas to bring in a run of Canandaigua Southern X29 boxcars. Now, one of the things that happens on any of these projects that I have, here is oh golly, it's an early resin kit, Henry T, I'm thinking. But he did some panel side hoppers, and I concluded that now see, these are a little different. This is the Canandaigua Southern's newer lettering scheme, which was sans serifed. That's the earlier one. And you'll notice that the later one has a white filled in Canandaigua Southern arrowhead. So little differences like that, differences in the repack and reweigh dates, trying to take into account when freight cars get painted and when they get overhauled and so on. So as I said, we have a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun developing this. This is a USRA rebuilt Gone. I figured that they would have to have some USRA cars as well. And as I said, I went ahead and did decals for all of these. Most of the work, not all of it, but most of it was actually done by a couple of fellows who build cars for me. Ron Gribbler has done a lot of them. He does a great job of assembly, of decaling, of subtle weathering. This actually is another John Armstrong engine. It is called the Super Allegheny, and John designed this during the time that the actual Alleghenies for C&O and Virginian, the 2666s, were being built. And he decided he wanted a dual service, higher speed Allegheny so it could be used on passenger trains. And from engineering practices, he figured out that it would require a 4-wheel lead truck and a much longer pilot deck. And after the fashion of steam locomotives on Canandaigua Southern, he made his a Belpaire firebox and put together a couple of Lobaugh tenders with 4-wheel tender trucks on them. And he made drawings of this almost at the same time that Lima was building the actual prototypes. And when he completed it, he did it in outside third rail, which was the way that his entire railroad was originally built. And I wanted to convert it and not only use it on my railroad, but to be able to take it to other railroads and display it. And one of the hardest conversion jobs I ever had was trying to outside third rail it. And of course, when you're using outside third rail, the entire locomotive can be one piece electrically, because you don't have to worry about insulation. And you'd be amazed at the number of opportunities you have to complete short circuits on a steam locomotive going from the boiler and the little itty bitty pieces that hang down onto the mechanism. But we've got it pretty well done now. It's been through several rebuildings and several troubleshootings, but I'm happy to have it. I have I think 6 of John's original engines, and I'm very pleased to keep them in running condition. And it's kind of neat to be able to say to somebody who is in your basement because they're a John Armstrong fan, give them a North Coast throttle and say, 1206 is your engine. It's got the coal train. The best way to run the railroad, learn the railroad, is just to run. Here it is. That's pretty cool.
David, did he scratch build that?
You're talking about the 4666?
Yeah.
He built that on a Lobaw mechanism.
Okay.
And the boiler, the superstructure, the front end was scratch built, but the mechanism was Lobaw.
Got it.
It was a pre-war Lobaw mechanism,
Yeah.
and the torque is transmitted through a very long thread, like a screw thread that is flexible. It's the darndest thing you've ever seen, but it works pretty well.
I'll be darned.
Now this is basically a Penzi J, and you can see that in part from looking at the swirl on the cab side, which John tinkered with the boiler. So he put a Belpaire firebox. You will recall that the Penzi J was one of the few Penzi engines that never had a Belpaire firebox, but it did on John's railroad. And he put a gigantic sandbox on the top, and an outside bearing lead truck, and some other things that made it look Canandaigua Southernish. But it was, in point of fact, a relatively simple conversion from a U.S. Hobbies engine. It did have, as it was converted, he made it outside third rail, which was how John's layout was during all of the time that he had it. I went ahead when I got it and took out all the outside third rail and gapped and powered the frogs and did a lot of other work on it. But on John's railroad, everything was outside third rail, including the engines that he had to convert from two rail to outside third.
Did he use a lot of Lobaw's drive mechanisms?
Not that I know of. He had a very early dual service 484 that he scratch built, and I think that may have had a Lobaw mechanism on it. But the later engines that he used were basically U.S. Hobbies Max Gray precision scale that he Canandaigua Southernized by adding the Belpaire fireboxes if they didn't have them, and adding a very distinctive front end and some other details. Now, this engine, of course, I had some involvement in this in sort of odd ways. This engine was built from U.S. Hobbies mechanisms and boilers that I provided to Harry Heike, who was a well-known custom builder.
Mm-hmm.
He and I worked several trades. I wanted an S4 Wheeling and Lake Erie Burke, and I needed Harry to convert one for me. He had a customer who wanted the ultimate nickel plate Berkshire, and this is the engine that he produced using the parts that I traded him. And this went out to a fellow named Harris Russo out in Kalamazoo. And the joke is that this engine has more prototype detail than the prototype does. And eventually it came back through an estate, and I knew something about the engine, and I basically grabbed it out from under Jim Cantor. I told Jim to look up in the sky. Halley's Comet was up there, and while he was looking up at the sky, I bought the engine. But the only problem with the stuff that has that much detail is you got two problems. One is you can't pick it up anywhere. There's no safe place to pick one of these suckers up, and then if it ever derails or gets damaged or takes a header off the bench work, it's going to ruin your entire day. But these are all projects that I was involved in one way or another.
I think that's fantastic. I met a gentleman a few months ago out in California, Roy Anderson. Roy's 93 right now. He used to work for Lowball back in the pre-war days and the post-war days. And he did the tooling for Lowball on the Climax. And in his living room, he has on a shelf the first production model, the prototype that came off of the line for that Climax. And to hear him talk about Lowball and what Lowball went through and how he got into business, how he got into making the wheels and all that kind of thing is a fascinating story. And it doesn't surprise me that a person like John would not have used some of those mechanisms, because from what I understand from Roy, that was state of the art at the time.
Yes, and Lowball was a machinist, and the mechanisms that he built are just beautiful. They are mechanical works of art. And
Yes,
I would encourage, and of course, Lowball hasn't been made since maybe I'm not sure they ever came back after World War II, but certainly they were out of business by maybe 1950.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, even pretty serious modelers, have never seen one of those. But if you ever have an opportunity to pick up a Lowball kit and you are an admirer of beautiful machining, get one, because they are incredibly well made, even by today's standards. Even with CNC machine pieces and so on, they are hands down more beautiful as well as functional than you get.
Absolutely. That's my understanding. Well, let's change the subject here a little bit and get away from the modeling and the projects that you've done in that. You're also a big supporter of O-scale two-rail modeling and railroading. You've been a supporter of the O-scale Kings that now is called O-scale Central for many years. You're the current president of the association. What about the association drew you to it, David? And what makes it so important in your life?
Good question. O-scale Kings has a 25-year or so history, and it's been a very up and down organization. There have been periods when it's been pretty active. There have been other periods in which it's basically been very inactive, do nothing by any conventional description. But it is at this point the only scale-wide organization promoting two-rail O-scale. And as indicated, because O-scale two-rail has gotten small and its visibility has been reduced, there are a lot of people who do not know about two-rail O-scale, don't know what's available, don't know that they could model there. And I I really believe that O scale is the greatest modeling scale. I mean, no disrespect to other scales. I modeled in HO, I modeled in N, I modeled in Z, and I've even modeled in G. And of all of them, the best combination for mass and detail and enjoyment in modeling is 1:48, quarter inch to the foot, O scale 2 rail. And I think the scale is worth saving. We have a group of people now who share that, and I think we're really on the upward slope to bring the scale back. And one of the things that we're doing is to try and use the internet, use social media as much as possible to get the word out. So the decline of the retail hobby shop and the elimination of the Walther's O scale catalog deprived people of a single place to go to be able to find O scale and find out who had it. So we put together a scale-wide product and service guide where you can go and see what's available, see who has it. It's searchable by subject, and you can click on it and learn anything that you're looking for. There are somewhere in the pipeline over 200 vendors, service providers, manufacturers, distributors, and so on, that, with O scale. And we are working online. We have regular programs online about once a month for 2 rail O scale. We've got a quarterly journal. We've got a monthly newsletter. We are getting around to train shows, NMRA conventions, and prototype modelers meets. We also have on the website some introductions to for new modelers to get get answers to the kind of frequently asked questions that people have when they start out. And we'll be expanding that over time. We can't do everything at once. We also help sponsor the O scale national conventions. This particular clinic schedule is from our 2018 convention, and you can see that there is quite a lot of opportunities, both for clinics, for trading halls, for different trips and activities. And we were very pleased to be able to do this. Our next O scale national convention, this was our executive committee, and in the 2018 convention. And I will say that one of the real rewarding things about being in this hobby generally is the opportunity to have a successful experience where everybody works as a team, and everybody gets the satisfaction out of making it a success. So all of these fellows, the fellow who is second from right is Dan Pence. Dan and I have known each other since we were both about 14, and our paths have kept crossing. He and I went to the University of Michigan together. We were in the Navy program. We got our Navy commissions at the same time. We both were in Vietnam at the same time. And he moved to Washington in '74. He was there when I moved there in '75. We ran into each other on the street. We converted to O scale together, and we've been working on it together basically for almost our entire lives. And this was just a good group of people. On my left is Terence, who was just elected to the O scale Hall of Fame, and is a heck of a guy with online media, website management, and so on. To his left is Bruce Blackwood, who was my predecessor as the president of O scale Kings. And then all the way over on the left in the blue is Pat Mitchell, who is a Western Maryland Proto 48 modeler with probably the most stunning layout that I have ever seen. He was the set designer for the Kennedy Center in Washington, and if there is a woodworking technique or a material that is cutting edge, he knows it, and he's probably incorporated it into his layout. It's really quite beautiful. And the fellow in the front, and this is something I would plug everybody. I'm having a senior moment and I cannot remember his name, but he was our NMRA liaison. And we were able to work the O-scale convention in conjunction with the NMRA and the other scales. And he was very instrumental in making sure that things happened, the publicity got out, that we had access to NMRA volunteers and so on. And I really encourage that. This is, I told you that we were trying to get, maybe I didn't, that we are trying to get out and spread the word on O-scale activities at train shows, at NMRA meets, and at RPM meets. This is the O-scale Central booth at the Chicago O-scale show this last March. In the center, in front of Joe Norman, is our convention car for the 2023 convention, which is the Appalachian and Ohio Dave Stewart's Railroad, which is one of the real unknown gems in all of model railroading. And we were able to work with Atlas to get a convention car for that. And just to the left of Joe Norman's left shoulder is a poster for our upcoming 2023 convention, which, as I said, will be in Denver. If you look on the red table there is a yellow magazine. That's our quarterly journal that we put out for O-scale 2-rail. And then we have clinics and meetings and workshops and so on as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. I've never joined the organization. I've heard about the organization from the day it was originally formed. I never joined it. I'll be honest, Dave, it just never had anything to offer me. I couldn't justify a reason for its existence. Sure. And I just never joined it. But I know a lot of people have and enjoy it, and I wish you the best of luck bringing it back.
Well, thank you. We are bringing it back, and it's hard work. We've got a good team of people working on it, and you'll see from some of the other slides that we've got. We've had some very good activities, and we're pushing on to try and bring O-scale back. It blows my mind. We go to train shows. This, by the way, Atlas is still the largest full line O-scale dealer. A lot of their stuff is 3-rail, but they also make a lot of 2-rail. They generally keep a low profile, but we did get them to the 2018 National Convention. We were very pleased with that, and they were very pleased with it. Anyway, we are doing some good things in 2-rail O, and we invite everybody to join us. But part of what we do is educate people. We go to train shows, and somebody comes along and says, "Wait a minute, I've never seen one that didn't have a rail down the middle." So, we got a ways to go to educate the hobby, but we're working on it.
I got you.
This is some of the ways that we work on it. On the right there is one of the booths that we had at one of the shows showing the O-scale 2-rail. One of the things that's interesting, I think generally O-scale 2-rail is associated with the remnants of the modelers who modeled in it back in the 50s and 60s. And I was just going to tell you, though, that there are a good number of younger modelers who are now coming in. We think the railroad prototype modelers are our natural constituency because they love to put on the detail and like to do their own modeling work. And when your eyes begin to go bad and you go bifocular, you might want to move to a larger scale so you can see the stuff the little gimcracks that you're gluing on the models.
Absolutely. You're right about that. Listen, you mentioned the NMRA. Well, I understand the O-Scale Central now has an NMRA official SIG, S-I-G,
Yep.
that you're developing. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Well, the NMRA, again, the NMRA is not a perfect organization, and I know there are people who have questioned whether they're keeping up with the times, but they are an all-scale association for model railroaders. And one of the things that they do is for the different special interests, the guys who are into operating, or the guys who are into layout design, or the guys who are into narrow gauge or different scales, is to set up these special interest groups because they recognize that the focus for many modelers is not necessarily on an all-scale organization, but on the particular interests that they have. And so they designate different organizations as SIGs, or special interest groups. We have been able to use NMRA very effectively to use their media to participate in their, I'm looking for something here, to participate in their activities. And for example, they have an NMRA magazine that's got a 10,000 circulation. And this is an article that I wrote called O Positive, The Case for Two Rail O, which appeared in NMRA magazine's May 2022 issue. And we've got another article coming out soon. So it is being a SIG is useful, and we think it gives us the opportunity to get the word out. And one of the ways we do that is offering clinics. This is a clinic I did at the Indy multi-region NMRA convention in, I think, June of 2022. And this is part of a clinic I did on John Armstrong, his model railroad life and contributions. And it has played very well. And one of the things that I do not only is to educate people about John Armstrong, but also point out that John Armstrong was a dedicated, dyed-in-the-wool O-scaler.
Well, listen, let me turn the tables a little bit here and ask Jim and Eric a question. You guys have heard David talk now about all these different things that he's involved in. Which one of them really strikes you? I mean, of the different things that you know that he's involved in, what's the one that really, when you think about it, boy, that's really great?
Well, one of the areas that I really enjoy working with David on is promoting the O-scale hobby. And David has a lot of people at his house. He's had over thousands and thousands of people during tours, the same way I have on my layout. One of the things that I learned from Laurel Joyner, which was from San Antonio, Texas, was to really introduce people into O-scale. And he had quite a large railroad that was called the Great Southern. So that was my real inspiration. But David, he will have an open house, entertain people, make them feel welcome, introduce them to O-scale maybe for the very first time, and they're really amazed. But so part of that process is always helping David with the layout. And one late night, we're down there about midnight, and the NCE and the railroad's just running perfect. Everything's running wonderful. You couldn't ask for a better blessing. And then David looks to his left, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, there's smoke coming up, and it's not from a steam engine." Okay. The next thing we know, everything's shutting down. It all comes to a stop. And then we're looking at each other, and the flame had died down, and we're trying to figure out what electrical components short-circuited. So we spent the next couple of hours thinking about this great open house that David had planned and how we were going to get trains running. So David worked tirelessly through the night trying to get things operating, got everything back on board except for about 2 foot of track. So he worked with one of his ladies that worked in the office there, and he said, when this nickel plate Berkshire gets to this area, you just kind of put your finger behind the cab, push it 2 feet, and the train would run again. There was hundreds of people at that open house, and no one realized this little girl in the background was moving that Berk 2 foot, and it ran perfectly. So that goes to show you that even promoting this hobby and doing everything right, there's still these little hiccups that happen. But David covered it well, and we had a great time. And David, you know, as we all work hard to have open house and promote the hobby, David's a real master at that. Thank you.
You know, you bring back so many memories from me. One of my great honors was to be able to meet Lowell and spend some time with him.
Absolutely.
And he was such a gentleman. I mean, my God in heaven, you just knew the class act that you were with when you sat down and talked to him for 5 minutes. He was just something else, and his model railroad was just outstanding. That'll always be a fond memory of mine. And I hadn't thought about him for a long time until you mentioned it.
Well,
I have 4 of Laurel's original engines on the layout, and I have a number of other pieces of rolling stock from different friends of mine, including Laurel, that have passed on, and I really regard it as a real blessing that I can help keep their memory alive. One of the trains on my Phantom Railroad is called the City of Everywhere, and it originates in San Antonio, and it goes to New York City by way of Buffalo. And frequently the power is 1 nickel plate PA and 1 Great Southern DL 109. And it's got Great Southern rolling stock passenger cars in it. So,
well, Jim, if you look at my bench work in the back behind me, it is inspired by Laurel. And he used residential construction to build all of his bench work.
Yeah.
And there was an O-scale magazine that Vaughn Jones did in the 80s and 90s, but he did a 6-part article of Laurel's construction. And that's always very inspiring to look at and understand how to build a quality O-scale layout.
You know, that's another memory I have. You know, you're really making me go back in time, because this has to be mid 80s, maybe early 80s. I just don't remember. I don't even remember what city it was in. But Lowell came up to me. We were at a convention, and I had been writing for 48-foot O-scale news. It was the only O-scale 2-rail magazine that was really out there at that point. And I've been doing it for years. And I wrote the Singing Wire column for the magazine. And Lowell came up to me and he said, "Hi, Jim, how are you doing?" "Fine, great." He said, "I want to tell you, you guys are doing a great job with that magazine." And I thought, my gosh, somebody like him might have read one of my articles. I don't believe it. and that's always stuck in my mind. You know, he just knew how to infatuate you. I mean, he was your friend. You met him and he was your friend. In my opinion, that's what I remember about him.
And his personality was a lot like David's, where he was always very inviting, always introduced people to the hobby, always wanted to share that experience. In fact, his layout, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but the State Department had his layout. So if you had a dignitary from another country, they were able to have a private showing of his railroad if they had any interest in no scale. And that's the type of stuff that David does. And maybe that's always been inspiring to me, to have open house, be able to feed people and enjoy it and have an experience of. And one of the things I always remember was that L'Oreal did a fabulous job of making O-scale feel very first class.
Yeah, and David is so fortunate to have some of his rolling stock. I mean, that would be that is really something to say, because again, people like that, where we don't have the total railroad that you can enjoy and everything, but you can have bits and pieces of it. You know, that's history. That is our history. And the more that we can preserve that, in my opinion, the better off we're all going to be in the future.
Well,
So
there will be people like in the future that'll look at David Vaughn much the same way, because when you go to an open house at David's, the first thing he does is hand you an MCE controller, gives you a train, and says, go have a good time. And I'll tell you, he is a great ambassador for the O-scale society.
I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried if they ever do something like get the State Department dignitaries coming through, because sure as heck, that's when we're going to see smoke coming from outside the layout and have complete meltdown. So you know how that happens, right? Hey, it ran perfectly yesterday.
But that's why it was so important to me to do this show with David, because David in the future is going to be recognized as one of the leaders of today. And when that happens, people are going to sit back and say, geez, you know, I should have gone to that convention. I could have met him. I was in that same area. I just didn't take the time. And so they'll be able to go to this video, hopefully, and get a feel for who this guy was that they keep hearing about, that did all of these great things, that saved John Armstrong's layout, all of these great things that he's done. Now you'll get an opportunity, hopefully, to come back and find out a little bit about who this guy really was. What do you think, Eric? What all these things that he does, what stands out to you?
He's just always so inviting. I think Jim hit the nail on the head. You know, everything that Dave does is typically about friendship, camaraderie. He has a saying whenever we come over, inside every N scaler is an O scaler wanting to come out. He just always introduces the hobby to anybody and everybody. And I mean, Jim couldn't have said it better. Of course, Dave has taken inspiration from other people, John Armstrong, among others. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Jim, which was, people are going to look at Dave and say, I'm glad I met him. And this is what I took away from him. Right.
Exactly.
You always go over to Dave's and always so welcoming and just so sharing. And it's not a surprise because it's expected. Like when we go over there, hi Dave, how are you? He's so open and generous with his layout and with his knowledge. We never miss an opportunity to go over. Always bring somebody with you. Bring a friend. Always.
Absolutely. And I've heard many people say the same thing that you guys are saying. And it's been my personal experience with David. So I understand what you're saying, but it's nice to have somebody say it as well as you all are saying.
Well, thank you.
Well, David, let me get back to you and change the subject again. There's this railroad called nickel plate something. I'm not sure, but you keep telling me about it. And I've heard other people mention it from here and there. And then when we had our practice session to see if we knew what we were going to do here tonight, you told me some things about the nickel plate that I'd never thought about before. And I'm not sure other people have either. One of the things that you told me, and it hit me and it was really interesting to me. And I'd like for you to touch on it if you can. You said something to the effect that you admired the philosophy of the nickel plate road. And that to the best of your ability, your operation of your railroad is partly based or mostly based on the philosophy of the nickel plate road. So if you could tell me a little bit about why the nickel plate's so important to you, And if you could hit a little bit about the philosophy that you're talking about, because I think that really is interesting, and I don't think it's a subject that a lot of people have heard.
Sure. Thank you. Look, we look at the individual models on the railroads that we are trying to imitate. But the individual models don't really tell the story. You think you've got an interesting model with a big boy. Get a railroad that models the big boy on Sherman Hill. You think you've got a K4 and it looks pretty. Put it behind a Broadway Limited on the 4-track main line, and you've got a lot more interest. You've got a lot more opportunity to really tell a story. And the nickel plate really does have I won't say unique, but it's got a special story to tell. Nickel plate was a bridge line. It picked up traffic in Chicago, Peoria, and St. Louis, and it hauled it across the Midwest as fast as it could and dumped it off in Buffalo and other places to get the eastern markets. And it was extremely competitive. That was that you had the Wabash and the Erie and the B&O and the Pennsy and the New York Central. It was there was a lot of competition there, and nickel plate really had its own business model and its own operating model, and that makes it very interesting for us to replicate in miniature. Nickel plate built the entire railroad around the nickel plate Berkshire, which is not only a beautiful engine, but if there is an engine that has been better matched to the assignments that it was given, I don't know what it would be. And as I said, nickel plate built the entire railroad around these Berkshires. It built the schedules, the tonnage ratings, the passing sidings, the yard tracks, the interchange points and schedules all around this nickel plate Berk. And they ran freight at 60 miles an hour behind steam locomotives. They ran piggyback behind steam locomotives in a big way. It was a very, very forward-looking railroad, and it was sufficiently efficient that on 2 occasions, not just one, the diesel manufacturers brought diesels onto the nickel plate to sell diesels as a replacement for the Berkshires. And in both instances, the Berkshires won, and the railroad did not buy the diesels. Now, eventually, the difference got too great, and the price of steam locomotive parts got too great. And eventually, like every other railroad, they dieselized, but they lasted a very long time. They did not, the Berkshires did not end up on work trains and locals. They went out all the way to the end in their mainline assignments. And the people who worked for the nickel plate were very proud, and it was a real family atmosphere. Some railroads, the folks did not want to be working for the railroad, and they had negative relationships between management and the employees. Nickel plate was not one of them. And the Nickel Plate Historical and Technical Society, which was the first modern and continuous railroad historical society, founded by Tony Custer, who is the third from the left in the photograph that's in the lower left-hand corner. He's there with his wife Judy and with my friend Jim. Was the founder of that society, and it has been a remarkably stable society particularly for a railroad that hasn't turned a wheel under its own name in 60 years. And I was telling you how beautiful the nickel plate Berkshire is. I give you Exhibit A up on the screen right now, and that's 765, which the Fort Wayne people have been using in mainline service, and they have really contributed a great deal to railroad history in general and to the nickel plate in particular. They're a real great operation. That's just me and out on the narrow gauge. Actually, we were out there last year for the O-Scale National Convention. We're having a home and home game with going back to Denver, but they did a great job last year putting together some tours after the convention was over. That's and this is Doyle McCormick. We could put his name and face in a number of places in this presentation. He is the fellow who restored the Southern Pacific Daylight 484, and who is in the final stages of putting together a nickel plate PA. And he's been incredibly, remarkably persistent through this. And he's one of the guys I really admire because of his single focus on being able to move these very complicated projects along where there really isn't any plan, there isn't any path, there's just Doyle and a whole bunch of determination and ingenuity. If this is just, I'm supposed to talk about the pictures, I'm happy to do that. One of the problems with the nickel plate is it is easy to get sucked in because there is so much appealing about the railroad and its equipment. And there is a car, there's a heavyweight Pullman called Kichigami Club, which is an ex-nickel plate business car, which is owned by a couple of retired Norfolk and Western engineers. And I was given the opportunity because Eric Payne's dad, George, is a good friend of the owners, to ride that car on a deadhead move from New York to Washington. We're going down the Northeast Corridor at 110 miles an hour. We're the last car on the train, and the car was coming off a trip, a charter, and they had the cook still on board, and the cook was the retired pastry chef from the Greenbrier Hotel. We're riding down the Northeast Corridor 110 miles an hour, and we're having buttermilk pancakes and country ham in the dining section. And I got off of that and I thought, you know what? This would really be cool if I could do something like this. So I started to, that's my wife, Cotty, who puts up with a great deal and is actually a contributor and a co-owner of this car that we're talking about. I first tried to get nickel plate number 1, the Van Swearingen business car, and there were various complications there. I don't know how much you guys know about the Indiana Transportation Museum, but it was in the process of going belly up with a great deal of hate and discontent being generated. And I lucked into a second former nickel plate car, the city of Chicago, which is a 5 double bedroom buffet lounge. And for various reasons, not having anything to do with any of us, this thing had come through from its original construction date in 1950 until it's sitting out on the repair track down in Austin, Texas, on a tourist railroad, essentially intact. Its sister car, City of Cleveland, had been roto-rooted to be part of the American Orient Express, so it looked like the same car, but it wasn't. It wasn't inside. And this car became available, and I went down, and George Payne, Eric's father, who's there in the black, we looked at it and said, we got to have this car. So we bought it. We brought it from Austin, Texas, to basically outside of Cincinnati, and we're able to use it with our friends and use it for charter service. And all of these folks, I could go through the entire crew here, but two that I want to point out in particular. One is the fellow on the front left. That's Eric Peterson. He's a retired CSX signal engineer and is very active in O-Scale Central, has been very responsible for a lot of our steps forward. And sort of behind him is Dan Dowdy. And Dan runs an outfit called O-Scale Resource. He also runs S-Scale Resource, but we don't hold that against him. And it is an online magazine. So it is kind of the new business model that that I think is probably going to become much more widespread in the publishing industry than the traditional glossy paper, print it and put it in the mail. And in fact, it's moving more in the direction of new tracks and your kind of presentations than it is the traditional magazine publishing. But this is the interior of the car. And if you see, this is the dining section. And if you look there with the little Formica and chrome tables, this is 1950 chic. And we are trying to restore it as it was in 1950. Obviously, we got to have a couple of differences, like chemical toilets as opposed to flush it and let it go out on the track, and microwaves and a few things like that. And one of the real fun parts of this is when you work with a 12-inch to the foot model. Not only do you meet a whole different crowd of people, there are a lot of folks who are into tourist lines and private cars and restoration and so on. But you also learn an incredible amount about the way the cars were constructed, about what has to be done in order to repair them. And like restoring any other out of production vehicle, a bus, a truck, a car, a boat, whatever, there's a lot of ingenuity involved in finding parts to do it, inventing things where there are no parts available, making it up as you go along, and still maintaining it in a very high level, which is necessary to get Amtrak certification.
So Dave, one of the things about this picture that I love that you're showing is in the lower right corner, that the 7-Up in the colas in the bottom. When Dad was growing up, Dad rode the car when he was like 10 years old, plus minus, and he rode it from Rocky River down to Cleveland. He remembers riding that car, drinking 7-Up for a nickel. And the way that you guys have put that car back together with the carpet and the picture on the far wall and the colors and everything, you hit it out of the park. And I know Dad loves to tell the story when he went back in that car for the first time and saw it. It's just you're getting really, really close. That car is going to be immaculate when it comes out on Amtrak. It's going to be beautiful, and it should always serve 7-Up on that car.
Well, I couldn't get a 7-Up for him for the same 10 cents that I'm sure he paid when he was
Exactly.
riding from Rocky River to Cleveland.
Yeah.
But a lot of my inspiration for the car is based on the Catalpa Falls, which is the ex-Pennsy car that Eric and George Payne and Bob Andrews and a couple of other people, including a very small piece that's mine, have been doing. It's several years ahead of where we are, and is already being used in Amtrak service. So everybody on there, they're basically all trained people, and one of the real joys of all of this is to be able to get your friends together and go on a train ride.
Dave, Eric, are you all familiar with the association of, I forget what it's called now, but it's the owners of private passenger, private
Yeah.
car?
Yeah, there's a couple out there. There's RPCA, there's Aprico. Those are the main two. Yep.
Yeah. I tried to approach, I forget which one now, because I only found one when I was trying to do my research. I approached one several years ago where I wanted to do an article in a magazine and try to get them to agree to have some kind of a logo that modelers could put on cars to, in effect, represent that they had restored the cars to the original condition and so forth, and they were members of that association. And I never could get them to bite at that, but I still think that would be a great idea for some modelers to have something different on their railroad that a lot of people may not even know exist out there as far as association.
Follow up with RPCA, the Railroad Passenger Car Alliance. They tend to be a little bit more open and informal than the other group, and they might be worth working with.
Thank you. So, David, let me ask you this: you've covered the gauntlet really of everything to do with model railroading, and including the rail fanning, the owner of a real car, and so forth. I mean, you're doing it all. So, who were the people that influenced you? I mean, where did you? People had to hold your hand at some point. I mean, you just didn't walk into all of these great events. So, who helped you get there?
Everybody along the way, and I'm going to name some names, but my concern in doing all of this is that I'm going to miss somebody. This is Bob Levesey, who is one of the former presidents of O-Scale Kings. He is also has been the president of the New York Society of Model Engineers, which I think lays claim to being the oldest O-Scale club in the country. And he's one of the guys. We've got some photographs, some I either couldn't find or we just didn't have time. But he's one of the guys that I've really enjoyed working with. Obviously, I started, and here I mentioned that I have some guys that have worked on the layout and have built cars. Ron Gribbler in the red sweater there lives in Lebanon, Ohio, and he loves to assemble kits and build models. And I have relied on him shamelessly to do a lot of the building for me. He's a B&O modeler, also two-rail O-scaler, but he's just a really, really nice guy, and he does great work. On my left is Bob Chapman, and Bob did a lot of the work, particularly in the early part of my layout. He was doing basic stuff like drywall and painting and wiring. But he also did a lot of work on the scenery. Bob is a former F-4 Phantom pilot who flew out of Thailand during the Vietnam conflict and wound up alive after 75 combat missions or something, but really, really nice guy. Both of these guys did, and Bob gave me a lot of inspiration at the early part in particular, because there were certainly times when I looked at all of these three layouts, some of them in storage areas and some of them vertically stacked one next to the other, and thought, what have I gotten myself into? This is never going to work. This is the old bumblebees can't fly kind of theory. And Bob was there to say, no, we're going to put one foot in front of the other. We're going to get there. We're going to be methodical and so on. And there've been a bunch of guys like that. This is my brother, and my brother keeps professing that he is not a model railroader, but he's the one who actually was putting in the Nighthawks scene on my layout. Bob by the way, if you do Raisin Bran, the cardboard that they use is very nice for shims and temporary walls and stuff like that. I really recommend it. But Jim is a wonderful carpenter, and he loves to find inventive new ways to do things. So I've relied on him very heavily. He just retired, and so other than nursing his golf game, he's mine, because his wife wants him out of the house. She says, I married you for better, I married you for worse, I didn't marry you for lunch, go find something else to do. So anyway, he does a lot of work on the layout now too. This is a guy, the inspiration is 4-dimensional. It goes through time. So a lot of I've got fellas that I mentioned, Dan Pence, that I've worked with since he and I were 14. A guy in the first model railroad club that I was involved in Ann Arbor named Tom Bailey was a modeler then, and I've kept in touch with Tom, and we've been friends for 65 years. Rick Trinkle, I've only known for a year, but one of the reasons that he's really inspiring to me is Rick was sort of born as a modeler into the era of CAD, into the era of 3D printing, into the era of high tech. And he is able to articulate this in a non-techie kind of way. And he has said to me, I said, this is my dream. I want to be able, if I'm a historical society, or if I'm a modeler with a particular love for something, I would like to be able to assemble plans and photographs. On the one hand, put together all of the material in a plan package of some kind, and out the other end of the process, give it to a person like Rick, and out the other end of the process, get a finished piece of rolling stock. And I want it to be accurate, painted, leathered, weathered if you need it. Can you do it? And he said, we're probably a year away from that. Now, I think he may be being a little bit optimistic, but I think that's one of the areas where things are going, is you're going to see a lot more technical advancement in model railroading. And because it's a small scale and needs to have short runs and minimum inventory, I think 2-rail O-scale is going to be one of the real beneficiaries of all of that. And I'm having this dialogue with Trinkle right now to see if we can translate this into actual 3D projects. But other inspirations, Tony Custer has been a real inspiration, partly because he is a nickel plate modeler, and for all the reasons that we've talked about, that floats my boat. But he also is a guy who thinks about the hobby. He thinks about where he as the modeler fits in with the models, and they are not just a bunch of models rolling down a track. He's running a miniature railroad with all of the satisfaction and all of the occasional frustration that has. But Tony was and still is the publications director for the Nickel Plate Historical Society, and I think we've got the best magazine of any of the historical societies. But we've also got, he just knows so much about the nickel plate, about the publishing industry, and sort of the philosophy of working on a model railroad and making it actually feel like you're running a real railroad. And nobody is better at that than Tony. I already talked about Jim Cantor. We egg each other on. That's the only real problem. Is he'll come up with some cockamamie project that he wants to do, or I'll come up with one, and we look at the other and goes, "Yeah, we could do that," you know. And and I talked about the O-Scale National Leadership Team that we had and the people there. I told you, I think I said something that Terence just got put on the O-Scale Hall of Fame. We're real proud of that. There are other people. I talked about Doyle McCormick. I mean, just the idea of him as an example of being able to take a 20-year project, to be able to go to 10 different places and pull it all together and just keep moving the ball forward. You know, we used to talk about Big Ten football as being 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And you know, there have been times when Doyle has been 3 yards in a cloud of dust, but he's always getting 3 yards on every play. So, you know, he's one of these guys who is inspiring too. We've got a good leadership group with O-Scale Central. I mentioned Eric Peterson. He has been very inspiring because he's been willing to do a lot of just the internal organization stuff that really makes things go. So I try and draw inspiration from the groups, the people that I'm working with, and they're just some great folks in model railroading, and I've been very lucky to have been associated with a lot of them.
Well, I got to tell you, some of the people that I have talked to have said almost the exact same thing about you and the influence that you've brought into their lives. So to me, it's kind of like mentoring. It's you got a lot, you got a lot from other people, and you're giving a lot back to other people. And to me, that's the important part of our hobby, because that's what's going to transfer the knowledge of model railroading that's out there right now into the future model builders of tomorrow. And that's what's going to keep the hobby going, in my opinion. That's what's really going to keep modeling in the hobby going. And that's extremely important to me. David, let me ask you this. Let's go back to modeling for a minute. When you're building something, when you're creating something, how do you know it's finished? How do you know when it's time to put it aside, say, I'm done with that, and go on to another project?
Well, some part of that, part of the answer to that is the John Armstrong answer, which is, you know, I go as far as I go, and I don't want to call it unfinished, because that means I might have to come back and finish it sometime. So I got boxes on my layout that I started a project, you know, 20 years ago, and it's still in the box. So I'm not sure I'm very qualified to answer that question, but the sort of lay answer is, I know it's finished when it looks right. And when I'm doing, that looks right to me. That's that's an X29. I didn't build the car, but the weathering and sort of the way it fits together, and the little patches for the updates on the repack and reweigh dates and so on, that looks right to me. But I try and work from photographs. Everybody thinks they know what models, or what the prototype looks like, and they're almost invariably wrong. Blacktop isn't black. Clouds are not round and puffy. You know, and the stuff that we think we know and have in our head doesn't come out right. So I try and work from photographs wherever I can. And when it looks like the photograph, I start thinking maybe I've gone far enough. Maybe I shouldn't do anything more because I might screw it up. But yeah, that's how I know.
Let me ask you another question that I don't think gets asked enough and talked about enough in our hobby. How important do you think art is in our hobby?
What we're doing, of course, is art. Any miniature of anything is an art, whether it's the Venus of Willendorf or a cave painting or whatever. We're all representing the real world in some form other than how the real world actually is. And so, yeah, it's art. Our art is very interesting, though, because the purpose of our art, because this is the way trains are, is to make the models look typical, nondescript, grimy, faded, and generally forgettable. So how do you do that in a way that would be opposite of what most art looks like? We're not going with the flashy stuff. If we're doing it right, it's going to look like it's been out in the weather for the last 30 years. Case in point, this has an interesting story with it. These are O-scale nickel plate PAs, and there is a fellow named Lee Turner who is as close to an artistic genius as we're ever going to have in model railroading, who did the weathering on these. And Tony Custer has always been, who is not only our publications director, but who is in charge of the nickel plate calendar that we put out every year, has always been cautious about putting models in the calendar, because there are a bunch of folks in the old guard in the society that don't think models belong in the calendar, that we're not really a modeling organization, etc. So I provided this photograph to Tony, and Tony put it on the back cover of the 2021 calendar. And he didn't tell anybody about it. And most people went through that and just assumed it was a prototype photograph. And it wasn't until several months later somebody wrote and said, yeah, I just looked at my nickel plate 2021 calendar, and the PAs on the back cover are models. Can you believe it? Models. So anyway, the cat was out of the bag, but that's the effect I always want to be going for. And these PAs were done from photographs. I sent Lee Turner photographs and said, do this model with this weathering. And if you'll notice, the two models, and PAs ordinarily ran back to back on the nickel plate, have weathered differently. And that's basically because the front-facing unit and the rear-facing unit would get different exposure to the weather, and so they tended, even though they spent 900 miles, coupled to each other, they would end up weathering differently. I've got a couple of other sets of these PAs, and I've had every one of them done from photographs, and every one of them looks a little bit different.
Beautiful model. Just an absolutely beautiful model.
Thank you.
David, you've done it all, and you're still active. What are your future plans? Where are you going from here?
Well, at my age, I hardly buy green bananas anymore. So on the one hand, we've got to understand that life is brief, and you can plan all you want, but that's not necessarily how it's going to turn out. What's the old line? Man plans, God laughs.
Yeah.
So I am, on the one hand, I'm reluctant to be doing projections like that. But on the other hand, I live my life as we all do, because there are no spring chickens here. I live my life planning forward. Now, one of the theories that we have is that if you have unbuilt kits, God won't take you. So I'm good for about 155 right now. But one of the things I want to do is to finish the layout. It has much to be done, and like any other big layout, and probably most small layouts, it'll never be completely done. But I want to I want to complete the layout. I want to make it run better. I want to make it operate better. I want to continue to tell people about John Armstrong, because I think he was a great contributor to the hobby. And in fact, a lot of the things that people take for granted now, I mean, you read John Armstrong's books now, they are less profound than they used to be, because everybody knows it now. Everybody does it. But when John Armstrong did it, he was doing a lot of this stuff for the first time. So I want to try and keep talking about the contributions that John made. I think he's got a lot to tell us, even now. So I want to continue to do that. The Wit and Wisdom models is a way to do that. The clinics that I give is a way to do that. The website that I'm doing is a way to do that. And obviously the layout with the Armstrong scenery, the Armstrong track work, the Armstrong rolling stock is a way to do that. I want to continue to promote O-scale. I really think it is a marvelous scale to be able to express yourself in. As Eric said, I think my approach is every modeler in every other scale has a two-rail O-scale modeler trapped inside, struggling to get out. If they only realize and accept it. Certainly, as I said, every railroad prototype modeler, gluing these little microchips onto the bottom of an N-scale freight car, is if they're not a closet O-scaler, they should be. So I think we need to continue to do that by example, and I'm delighted to be able to keep pushing on that. And finally, I really want to be, you got it. I want to be able to run my car in two situations. One, I want to be able to run on Amtrak. And two, I want to be able to run behind 765. And I'm working on 765. And right now the car is actually in Akron, Ohio, in an old Wheeling and Lake Erie car shop. And it is as we speak, that pretty stainless steel fluting there has been stripped off because Pullman cars tended to rust underneath. So with a car that is this old, and by the way, these 1950 built cars were never intended to last 75 years. Right. When Pullman would have fallen off their chair if somebody told them they were going to be expected to be running 75 years from now. But so there's a lot of rust and replacements that need to be done. Amtrak is very safety oriented. And so one of the things we got to do is to take the trucks, which are standard 41N Pullman trucks, and strip them down to the smallest components you can get, sandblast them, X-ray them and magnaflux them for metal flaws, grind out and weld any imperfections, put them back together, machine everything to tolerances. We'll probably end up having to replace the wheels. We may end up having to replace the bearings. This is like having a yacht, this hole into which you pour money. The only difference is you have less chance of getting wet when you got a railroad car. But this is obviously a project that is important for historic preservation, and in addition to being historical, just because I think it would be fun. So that is one of my big ambitions, and maybe that's not the final one, because I think we got one more slide, maybe another slide. Bingo! My 2-year-old grandson, Harrison, is already into Thomas the Tank Engine, and I have every hope that at some point he's going to become a 2-rail O-scaler. So that's probably the ultimate fantasy. But he has been down. He already knows what the trains are, and we've had a lot of fun. So if I can pass it along, that would perhaps be the ultimate goal.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Well, listen, we've been going a long time now, a little bit over 2 hours, if you can believe that. Seems like time's flying by when you're having fun. So let me ask you, Jim and Eric, any last words that you'd like to say about David or to David?
Well, one of the things that David brought up is that modelers today are tending to be more of prototype modelers, and probably those modelers are going to join an historical society. And we would certainly encourage people to do that. Support your historical society through a membership. And I think that's really important. Like the Nickel Plate Society has a great publication. And we would certainly, whether you're modeling Pensy, Southern Pacific, Nickel Plate, support that organization. It'll pay dividends. And when it comes time to model, it comes time to detailing your PA1s and weathering them, you'll have the information right from the magazine like David did.
Eric, how about you?
I couldn't say it better, Jim. When it comes to modeling, always using the resources available. I'm sure that's how Dave models, and that's where the future of the modeling is. And whatever scale it is, right? Like David says, there's an O scaler waiting to get out in everybody. So no, I thank you for putting this together, Jim. Thank you so much.
Well, I've enjoyed it, to tell you the truth. Enjoyed meeting both of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And Dave, since we're about to shut it down, I'm going to give you the last word, sir.
I'm not sure I have any dramatic, closing statement to make. This has been a fun experience. I guess the one principle that comes through for me, and I hope over time will come through for everybody, is when we get into the hobby, we all think it's about the hardware. It's about the new model. It's about chasing the collectible. It's about repairing the one that doesn't work. It's finding the 3 different variations that will make your collection complete, and so on. And over a period of time, I think we find out that what the model railroading community really about is more the community even than the models or the railroading. We are these are our buddies, these are our friends, and if we're doing it right, we are building those friendships and we are having fun, and that's what it's really all about.
David, it's been my honor to have you with us tonight. I can't thank you enough for taking the time. You have made and you're continuing to make just outstanding contributions to our hobby, and particularly O-scale model railroading. And I can't thank you enough for everything that you're doing. Obviously, you have some great friends, and obviously they feel very strongly about the activities that you're involved in. So I really do appreciate all 3 of you being here tonight, and particularly spending the amount of time that you have. Thank you so much, David.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the contributions you're making too. One of the things that we've all got to do is keep up with the times and the internet and social media and online presentations like this. I think that's the direction that a lot of the communications are taking and have to take, and we'll all be better off for it. So thank you very much for your contributions, and thanks to everybody that works on the show with you.
Thank you so much. Well, listen, thanks also to our YouTube viewers. We can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us tonight. I think we had a great discussion with David and his friends. I hope you learned a lot about David and feel that you know him a little bit better. I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's New Tracks Modeling. You'll need to click the bell and hit all, and you'll get notices of all of our future shows. Some, like this one, you can only view live or see the video of if you're on our YouTube channel. So we hope you'll join it, and look forward to seeing you next time. On October the 6th, we have another special, really special guest, Colonel Tom Feely. Colonel Feely is an expert on the Alamo, and he has a model that it is just unbelievable. It brings modeling to a whole different level. When you see what he has accomplished and what he has produced, you'll end up saying, I don't believe he did that. October the 6th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, meet Colonel Tom Feely. And also don't forget to subscribe to our website, New Tracks Modeling. That way you'll be able to join us live on our Zoom shows each Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'll tell you, we've got a show on the 28th of September, next Wednesday night, that we're going to have a major announcement on that I think is really something really super special. And I'm really so proud that we're going to do this. So I hope you'll join us to hear about what that surprise is all about. Again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Can't thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us. Happy modeling. Till next time.